She was my friend's older sister. I was supposed to leave. Instead, I stayed. I didn't come over expecting anything to happen. It was supposed to be one of those ordinary visits. Help my friend carry something from the garage, stay a few minutes, maybe grab a glass of water, then leave. I'd been to his house plenty of times before. Nothing about it felt new, until I heard her voice. It came from somewhere down the hallway, calm, unhurried, carrying a warmth that made me pause before I even realized I had. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something steady about it, something that felt like it belonged to the house itself. When I turned the corner, that's when I saw her. She was standing by the kitchen counter, sleeves pushed slightly up her arms, focused on what she was doing. My friend's older sister. I knew who she was, of course. I just never really noticed her before. Not like this. She looked up and our eyes met. It lasted only a moment, maybe half a second longer than it should have. But it landed heavier than I expected. Her expression didn't change much. Just a small, polite smile. The kind adults give without thinking about it. And still, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. "Hey!" she said, her voice softer up close. I answered, suddenly aware of how I was standing. How my hands hung at my sides. How my heartbeat felt louder than the room around us. She smelled faintly of coffee and something clean, something comforting. The house felt quieter than it had a second ago. She moved aside to let me pass, and as I stepped by, our shoulders brushed. It was nothing, barely a touch, but it sent a small jolt through me anyway, like my body had noticed before my mind did. I told myself it was just surprise, just proximity. She didn't step away immediately. Neither did I. My friend called out from another room, breaking the moment. She glanced in his direction, then back at me, as if checking whether I needed anything. Her posture was relaxed, confident. Someone who belonged exactly where she was. And that's what unsettled me most. There was no performance in her presence. No need to impress. She carried herself with the kind of ease that only comes from knowing who you are. From having lived a little. I felt suddenly younger in a way I wasn't used to feeling. As I followed my friend toward the garage, I caught myself looking back once. She was already back to what she was doing, completely unbothered. Or maybe just very good at hiding it. I told myself it was nothing. But the truth was, something had shifted, quietly, almost politely, the way certain moments do before you realize they matter. And even as I helped lift boxes and laughed at familiar jokes, part of my attention stayed behind in the kitchen, with the woman who had looked at me like she already knew I would remember her. The next time I came over, I noticed her before she noticed me. She was in the kitchen again, sunlight coming in through the window, resting lightly on her shoulders. The house smelled familiar, wood, coffee, something baking. But my attention narrowed the moment I saw her standing there, calm and unhurried, like she had nowhere else she needed to be. She looked up and smiled, this time without surprise. "You're back," she said, like it was an observation instead of a question. I nodded, suddenly aware of how easily she said it, as if my presence had already found its place. My friend disappeared into another room almost immediately, leaving the two of us in a quiet pocket of space that felt smaller than it should have. We started with small talk, safe things, work, traffic, a comment about how hot it had been lately, the kind of conversation that usually passes without leaving a mark. Except this one didn't. She listened differently. When I spoke, she didn't rush to respond or fill the silence. She tilted her head slightly, eyes steady on mine, like she was actually absorbing the words instead of waiting for her turn. It made me slow down without meaning to, choose my words more carefully. At one point, she laughed. Not loudly, not politely, but with her whole face. It softened her, made her seem closer somehow. I caught myself smiling back, longer than necessary. I reached for a glass from the cabinet at the same moment she did. Our fingers brushed. It was brief, almost nothing, but neither of us pulled away right away. The contact felt warm, grounding. When she finally withdrew her hand, her smile shifted, quieter, thoughtful, like she'd noticed it too. "Sorry," she said, even though there was nothing to apologize for. I shook my head, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. She poured the water and slid the glass toward me across the counter, her fingertips lingering on the rim for a moment longer than needed. She asked me questions then. Not the usual ones. Not what I did, but how I felt about it. What I wanted to be doing 5 years from now. No one my age ever asked me things like that without joking. When I answered, she didn't interrupt. Just nodded occasionally, offering a soft yeah or a quiet smile. I found myself admitting things I usually kept to myself. Doubts, restlessness, the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something unnamed. She surprised me by sharing a little too. Nothing dramatic, just enough. A line about how life doesn't always land where you expect it to. The way she said it, calm without bitterness, told me there was more beneath the surface. When my friend finally came back, the room seemed to widen again. Noise returned. The moment shifted. But as I got ready to leave, she met my eyes once more. Steady, warm. And for a second, I had the strange sense that we'd already crossed some invisible line. Not into something reckless, just into something real. By the third visit, the house no longer felt unfamiliar. I didn't hesitate at the door the way I had the first time. I didn't wonder where to stand or what to do with my hands. Everything about being there felt easier, like my body had already learned the rhythm of the place. So had she. She greeted me with a smile that reached her eyes, the kind that made it feel like I'd arrived exactly when I was supposed to. There was no awkward pause this time, no polite distance. She stepped aside without thinking, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her as I passed. My friend was distracted, pulled into a call, leaving us in the living room with the quiet hum of the house around us. We sat down on the couch, not opposite each other, but angled close, knees turned inward, shoulders nearly touching. Neither of us commented on it. She tucked one leg beneath her, relaxed, comfortable in a way that made the space feel safe. I could hear her breathing when the room went quiet between sentences. Not loud, just present. It slowed me down. We talked the way people do when they don't feel the need to impress each other. About things that mattered and things that didn't. She remembered details I hadn't realized I'd shared before. I noticed how she asked questions that didn't push, only invited. At some point, the conversation shifted. She mentioned something about a past relationship. Not in detail, not with bitterness, just a simple truth spoken gently. A pause followed, the kind where you can choose to fill the silence or let it breathe. I let it breathe. She exhaled softly, eyes dropping to her hands, then back to me. In that moment, the confidence she carried so easily slipped just enough to show something more human underneath. Not fragile, just real. Without thinking, I placed my hand over hers. The contact was careful, like a question more than a statement. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled slightly against mine, grounding, warm. The house felt impossibly quiet, like it was holding its breath with us. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, steadier. "Thank you," she said. Not for the touch, but for the understanding behind it. We stayed like that for a moment longer than necessary. Long enough for me to register the warmth of her skin, the calm weight of her presence. It didn't feel rushed or dangerous. Felt earned. When my friend finally reappeared, the spell loosened but didn't break. She withdrew her hand slowly, offering a small smile that felt like a secret. Later, as I stood to leave, she reached out, just briefly, to straighten the sleeve of my jacket. The gesture was simple, almost automatic, but it carried a tenderness that stayed with me as I stepped outside. Walking away, I realized something that unsettled me more than the attraction itself. I wasn't nervous around her anymore. I was comfortable, and somehow that felt far more dangerous than anything else. I noticed it before I was ready to admit it. The way the room seemed to quiet whenever we ended up alone. The way conversations between us began to carry more pauses than words. Nothing had changed on the surface, and yet, everything felt different underneath. That afternoon, the house was unusually still. My friend had stepped out to run an errand, leaving us with nothing but the low hum of the ceiling fan and the late-day light stretching across the floor. She sat across from me at first, close enough to talk comfortably, far enough to pretend there was still space. We talked about something unimportant. I don't even remember what, until the words slowly trailed off. The silence didn't rush in. It settled. I looked up and found her already watching me. Her expression wasn't playful or curious. It was thoughtful, as if she were measuring something quietly inside herself. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away. The moment stretched. I became aware of everything at once. The warmth of the room, the steady sound of my own breathing, the way her posture remained open, relaxed, but alert. The confidence she carried was still there, but there was something new layered beneath it now. Awareness, caution, want. She stood, breaking the spell gently, and moved closer. Not abruptly, not with intention that could be questioned. Just enough to narrow the space between us. As she reached toward me, I felt my shoulders tense before I could stop them. She noticed. Her hand paused midair, then lightly brushed my collar, smoothing it the way someone might out of habit. The touch was brief, careful, but it landed with weight. Her fingers were warm, steady. "Your jacket's crooked," she said softly. It wasn't, but neither of us acknowledged that. Her hand lingered for a second longer than necessary before falling away. When she stepped back, the space she left felt louder than the silence had before. I swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. My thoughts were racing, but my body felt oddly calm, grounded, like it knew something my mind was still catching up to. She crossed her arms loosely, leaning against the counter, eyes never fully leaving me. "This feels complicated," she said finally, not accusing, just honest. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. There was no confession, no line crossed, just recognition. The quiet agreement that whatever was happening between us wasn't accidental anymore. The front door opened a few minutes later, the noise pulling us back into our roles. She stepped away, distance restored with practiced ease. But when she passed me, her fingers brushed my arm, deliberate this time. Not an invitation, not a warning, just a reminder. And as I left that day, one thought followed me all the way down the street. The air had changed, and there was no pretending it hadn't. I told myself I was leaving like I always did. Casual, unremarkable, just another visit that happened to end a little quieter than it began. I thanked my friend, slipped my shoes on, and reached for the door with the same practiced ease I'd used every time before. But I could feel her watching me, not in a way that made me turn around immediately, just enough to make my movements slow, as if something behind me hadn't quite finished speaking yet. The door was already open when she said my name. Soft, steady, close. I turned. She stood a few steps away, hands loosely folded, her expression unreadable. Not nervous, not smiling, just present. The kind of calm that comes when someone has already made a decision, even if they haven't said it out loud yet. "You forgot something," she said. For a second, I actually looked down, checked my pockets, my phone, the small things people usually forget when they're distracted. She noticed, and the corner of her mouth lifted, just slightly. She took a step closer. The house felt impossibly quiet. Even the street outside seemed to fade. When she spoke again, her voice dropped. Not in volume, but in intimacy. "Come here," she said. I did. Not because she told me to, but because my body already knew where it was going. She didn't rush it, didn't close the distance all at once. just enough so that I could feel the warmth of her presence, the steady calm of her breath. She reached out, resting her hand lightly against my chest, right over my heartbeat. I swear it sped up the moment she touched me. "There," she whispered. "That." Her fingers stayed there, grounding gentle, like she was anchoring me in the moment, not taking anything, just acknowledging what was already there. Then she leaned in and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't tight. It wasn't hesitant. It was the kind of hug that says, "I see you more than don't go." Her cheek brushed mine, warm and familiar. She stayed there just long enough for the world to narrow to the space between us. When she pulled back, her hands lingered at my shoulders, thumbs pressing softly, a quiet reassurance. "Be careful driving," she said, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everything had. I stepped outside, the door closing gently behind me. The night air felt cooler, sharper. I stood there for a moment longer than I meant to, heart still racing, the imprint of her touch still warm against my chest. As I walked away, I realized she'd been right. I had forgotten something. I'd forgotten how powerful a moment could be when it's handled gently. And I knew, without a single promise made, that neither of us would forget that whisper anytime soon. We didn't talk about it right away. There were no late messages, no dramatic follow-ups. Just a quiet awareness that settled in, steady, patient, like both of us were giving the moment the respect it deserved. When we finally did sit down together again, it was intentional. The house was quiet, late afternoon light stretching across the room. My friend was out, and this time the silence didn't surprise either of us. We chose seats close to each other, not touching at first, but aware of the space between us, the way it held more than distance. She spoke first. "I don't want this to feel confusing," she said gently. "Not defensive, not hesitant, just honest." I nodded. My throat felt tight, but steady. "Neither do I." She told me she'd noticed the shift too, how it surprised her, how she hadn't planned for it. There was no apology in her voice, only responsibility. She talked about timing, about life, about the weight of being someone's older sister and someone who had already lived through mistakes she didn't want to repeat. As she spoke, she rested her hands together in her lap. When I responded, she turned toward me fully, listening the way she always did, with her whole attention. I told her how safe I felt around her, how she made things quieter in my head, how being seen by her felt different than being admired. I admitted that I was afraid of misreading things, of wanting something that couldn't exist without complications. She reached for my hand then. This time, there was no hesitation. Her fingers wrapped around mine, warm, certain, and she squeezed gently, like she was grounding both of us at once. "You're not imagining it," she said softly. The words landed heavier than any confession could have. Not because they promised anything, but because they respected the truth. We sat there for a long moment, hands still joined, breathing in sync without trying to. The closeness felt earned now, conscious, chosen. "I don't want to rush this," she continued, "and I don't want to hurt anyone, including you." "I don't either," I said, and I meant it. She smiled then, small, real, and brushed her thumb across my knuckles, a quiet gesture that carried more care than urgency. When we finally stood, she leaned in and pressed her forehead lightly against mine. No kiss, no promise, just shared stillness. Felt like clarity. As I left that evening, the tension that once felt dangerous now felt steady, transformed into something patient and intentional. Whatever this was, we were finally meeting it with open eyes. Time didn't rush us after that. If anything, it slowed down. We kept seeing each other in the same quiet ways. Shared afternoons, familiar rooms, conversations that didn't need an excuse anymore. Nothing felt secretive. Nothing felt reckless. It was careful, intentional, built on the understanding we'd already named out loud. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. There was no constant tension tugging at us now. No wondering what a look meant or whether a touch crossed a line. We knew where we stood, close, aware, choosing each moment instead of being carried by it. Sometimes we sat side by side, shoulders touching lightly, reading or talking about nothing important. Sometimes she reached for my hand while making a point, squeezing once before letting go. The affection stayed gentle, grounding rather than consuming. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in warm gold, we stood near the doorway again. The same place where everything had shifted weeks earlier. She looked at me then, really looked at me the way someone does when they're memorizing a feeling rather than a face. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you," I replied. She smiled at that. Not the confident smile she wore so easily, but the quieter one she only showed when she felt understood. This time, when she hugged me, it felt different. Not charged, not hesitant, just secure. Her arms settled around me naturally, her hand resting against my back like it belonged there. I leaned into it without overthinking, breathing her in. Familiar now, comforting. She pulled back slightly and brushed her thumb along my jaw. A simple, affectionate gesture that felt like a promise without words. "Drive safe," she said again. I stepped outside, the door closing gently behind me, and realized how calm my chest felt. No racing thoughts, no uncertainty clawing for attention, just clarity. Walking away, I understood something I hadn't before. Not every meaningful connection needs urgency to be real. Some grow stronger because they're handled with care. And as I reached the end of the street, I smiled to myself, knowing that the way she watched me leave this time wasn't about wondering what might happen next. It was about knowing exactly where we stood. Sometimes the most powerful love stories don't begin with a kiss. They begin with the decision to stay emotionally, honestly, and without fear. And this time, I didn't forget a thing. As I walked away that day, I realized some moments stay with you forever. Have you ever felt a connection you couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you want more slow burn stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment.